On the 9th of April 2003, during the American invasion of Iraq, a huge statue of Saddam Hussein inside of Baghdad's Firdos Square was pulled down by American Marines and Iraqi civilians. The event symbolised the crumbling and fall of Saddam's brutal regime inside of Iraq, and he would later be captured and seized by the American forces. But when the Americans had invaded the country, they gave out playing cards to their soldiers to help them to identify high-value targets, members of Saddam's government and war criminals that needed arresting. Many sought to hide out, and they knew they were some of the most wanted. The man who was designated as the Ace of Diamonds, and number 4 on the most wanted list after Saddam and his sons Uday and Qasem, was Abid Hamid Mahmud, the personal secretary and close ally of Saddam Hussein. But in June 2012, he was too executed for his evil and crimes. Today we look at his execution, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Abid Hamid Mahmud al-Tikriti was one of the closest allies of Saddam Hussein. He was a distant cousin of Saddam, like many members of his government were, and he has been referred to as Saddam's right-hand man. He was born in September 1957 inside of Baghdad within Iraq, and he began a career inside of the military as a non-commissioned officer. It was expected at the time that most men served inside of the army, and Mahmud rose throughout the different ranks to become a lieutenant general. He then was invited to become part of Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator's personal bodyguard detachment. In this, he would control the security of the dictator, a man who would face a number of assassination attempts throughout his life. Saddam ran a regime of persecution and suffering, and he committed horrific crimes and genocide during his time in control, but Mahmud continued to rise throughout the favour of his distant cousin, the dictator of Iraq. In comparison to other historical figures, Abid Hamid Mahmud was almost like Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary. He was the man who acted as the gatekeeper to the dictator, and he controlled who saw Saddam, who had a meeting with him, and who he spent his time with. He was also the man in charge of the people who were refused access to Saddam. He was in constant contact with Saddam, and he was by his side all of the time. He was obviously a very trusted man, and was also placed in charge, alongside Saddam's son, Qasem, of being the leaders of the Iraqi Special Security Organization. This group was the most powerful security agency of Saddam, and it was responsible for the personal security of high-ranking government officials. The agency provided essential security to the dictator's regime, and they also undertook intelligence and were given special powers. They were given the authority to abduct people, murder, and also torture and intimidate, and this was all done on the orders of the dictator and Mahmud. It was a criminal organisation, and the Iraqi Special Security Organisation was known for many terrible crimes. Mahmud, as well as this, was known to have directed matters of state, and he handed down many of the regime's repressive orders, and he was, it's believed, also authorised to deploy weapons of mass destruction, should this have come to it. Others have claimed that he was the second in command behind Saddam, and that he was one of the only people who the dictator fully trusted and never questioned, and he was always by the dictator's side. The US invasion of Iraq is of course still debated today, and is seen as a very controversial move and attack, and as mentioned, the American army gave out playing cards of the most wanted to help soldiers identify targets should they have to capture them. Abid Hamid Mahmud was given the designation of the Ace of Diamonds, showing his importance, and as mentioned was 4th on the most wanted list. On the 16th of June 2003, in the city of Tikrit, a raid by members of the B Squadron Delta Force and G Squadron of the SAS, as well as the 1st Battalion 22nd Infantry Regiment of the 1st Brigade 4th Infantry Division, captured Mahmud. It was at the time considered the most successful raid and capture of the conflict, and many believed it would just be a matter of time before the dictator himself was found. Also seized were up to 50 people, believed to have been part of the security or intelligence service. It was thought he may have had details about weapons programs that were greatly sought after and wanted. The Americans wanted Mahmud to be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity for his activities associated in the most senior positions within Saddam's regime. Also found in the raid were millions of dollars in cash and jewellery stuffed in farmhouses. He was then subjected to a significant amount of interrogation, and the American forces wanted him to reveal everything about Saddam and his dictatorship, and also about weapons of mass destruction. It's not known entirely what he told, and he didn't know where the dictator was hiding out. But on the 29th of April 2008, Mahmud was brought to trial. He was tried by the Iraq Special Tribunal, which was set up by the Iraq interim government, and he was brought to trial along with 6 others, including other key members of the government. The courtroom heard of much of Mahmud's actions during Saddam's dictatorship, and 2 years later he was sentenced to death by the Iraqi High Tribunal for being guilty of crimes against humanity and genocide, as well as being involved in a restriction on banned political parties. He was also condemned to death for carrying out assassinations of rivals and torture of those who were locked up inside some of Saddam's most brutal prison sites. He then had to wait 2 years for his execution to be carried out. On the 7th of June 2012, he was taken from his prison cell inside of a site of incarceration in Baghdad, and he was taken into an execution chamber, where a gallows was found. The Iraqis utilised a drop gallows to execute those such as Saddam and his key allies. Mahmud was led onto the gallows platform by an executioner and prison guards, and he was then shuffled over a trapdoor. The executioner secured the noose around his head and placed a black cap also over his face. There would have been witnesses in the room that oversaw the proceedings, and when everything was checked, the executioner then released a trapdoor, and Saddam Hussein's right-hand man went plunging through the trapdoor. Abid Hamid Mahmud was the personal secretary of Saddam Hussein, and he was someone who had intimate knowledge of the crimes and genocide inflicted by his regime. The government and dictatorship of Iraq came crumbling down following the US invasion of the nation, and despite the controversial reasons for the invasion, there were many war criminals who had conducted terror inside of Iraq who were arrested and were brought to trial for their crimes. Mahmud was the 4th most wanted and the 1st most wanted after members of the Hussein family, and he was the personal secretary of Saddam, who controlled absolutely everything that a dictator did. He was one of the most trusted, but at the end of the hangman's rope, he was brought to his death, being executed. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.